Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisa Albitz, and I am privileged to be the chair of Cheshire Home Board of
Lacey.
Trustees. Cheshire Home is an independent organization that empowers young adults with spinal cord injuries to reclaim their maximum level of independence. Because we are a home for residents on their journey, we provide everything they need to live at Cheshire Home, from comprehensive clinical and therapeutic needs to vocational and recreational services, specialized services such as a fully accessible resident kitchen, and even simple things like motorized wheelchair accessibility throughout our building, so our residents can begin to enjoy their independence from the first day at Cheshire Home. Thank you all for joining the fourth Circle of Friends discussion titled Improving Lives Through Spinal Cord Injury Research. I'm happy to see some familiar faces and many new ones too. Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have researchers today from Kessler Foundation to share some amazing.
My face isn't here.
You will also hear from one of our very own Cheshire Home residents who just also happens to be a participant in Kessler Foundation's research. And we're going to hear how his experience has helped everyone involved in the rehabilitation continuum of care. Just a few housekeeping items. Today's conversation is being recorded. I'm sure you all saw that message. And we will present that through our website and social media so that you can all use that to share with your friends. We would also like you all to remain on mute, please, to keep the background noise to a minimum. We do want this to be an interactive conversation, though. So if you can, during the presentation, use the Zoom tools to either raise your hand, put your question in the chat. And if you don't get to do that, we are going to have an open Q&A session at the end where we will ask everyone to chime in. Before we get started, I'd like to just shout out to a few members of our immediate family. Cheshire Home's Executive Director, George Zeitler. We have several of our staff joining us today, and a few fellow board members are on the call: Scott McLeister, Jane Mitchell, Stuart Milston, and Erica Weber, who is also our moderator today. As I hand over the microphone to Erica to get started, she's going to explain how she became a member of the Cheshire Home family. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa, and welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. So I became involved with Cheshire Home just under a year ago. A little background on me: I'm trained as a clinical neuropsychologist. I'm a research scientist at Kessler Foundation. Most of my work involves the cognitive impact of neurological injury and illness in the context of how people function in their everyday lives and maintain their independence. And I've trained in a number of rehabilitation settings, and I was always struck by the extraordinary changes that happened to someone and their loved ones when there was a catastrophic injury like a spinal cord injury, and how much this really ripples out into affecting the person's livelihood, their ability to move home and retain what they enjoy, to what they do in their everyday lives. And it takes a lot of invested clinical professionals and social support circles to make sure that the person is back on track and achieving their life goals. The challenge always seems to be what happens after you leave the hospital. And I'm sure, as we all know and understand, those hospital stays are really getting shorter and shorter. And the challenges faced are really immeasurable. So through my work at Kessler Foundation, I learned about Cheshire Home, and I'd never heard of such a place that provided support that was specific to spinal cord injury, that eased that transition, had continued high level of care, and made it an overt goal to build independence and daily functioning skills so that the person could transition out and get back to living their lives. And let alone, this is such a unique place, and it's in our own backyard in Florham Park, New Jersey. So after taking a tour, learning more about the staff, I really felt compelled to join the board and help out in whatever way I could to ensure that Cheshire Home had the support and the recognition that it deserves. So I've been a member of the board since last April, and I chair the Fund Development Committee. And I'm so excited today to introduce some of my good colleagues at Kessler Foundation who are here to help us talk about what research can do and how important it is to do research on spinal cord injury and how this might impact the everyday lives of individuals with spinal cord injury, like those of our Cheshire Home residents. So I'll be introducing two of my good colleagues. One, Trevor Dyson Hudson. He's an MD. He's the director of our Center for Spinal Cord Injury Research at Kessler Foundation. His research interests include prevention and treatment of medical complications affecting people with SCI. And Dr. Dyson Hudson has benefited from his own lived experiences with spinal cord injury since 1992. And also, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Jean Zanka. She's the Assistant Director in the Center for Spinal Cord Injury Research and the chair of its Human Subjects Research Ethics Committee. Dr. Jean Zanka's research program focuses on the medical complications of SCI and programs to support the well-being and capabilities of caregivers for those with spinal cord injury. And also because we want to hear from experts, we want to hear from people who this really impacts. So you'll be hearing a bit today from one of our Cheshire Home residents, Hassan, who is as a guest speaker in a video. Unfortunately, he's unable to make this in person, but he'll be joining us via pre-recorded video. Hassan became a resident at Cheshire Home in January of 2021. He has a spinal cord injury at C4 and C5 up in his neck area. And the result of this injury has resulted in paralysis and quadriplegia. He attends therapies 4 times a week, and one day he'd like to return to the community living independently and get back to work. And he has a great deal of support from his family and friends, and he's been involved in some of our research at Kessler Foundation. So we're excited to hear from him as well. So I see that we have my two colleagues here. So thank you, Trevor and Jean. So we want to just kick off a little bit and can you give us a general overview of what is a spinal cord injury and how does it impact someone from a holistic standpoint?
Sure. So I'll start things, and thanks so much for having us today. So in order to understand spinal cord injury and how it might affect people, there's a few key points I want to make. Let's first start with the spinal cord itself, right? So if you think about it, the spinal cord is the main conduit from our brain that carries signals down to our body and from our body up to our brain, right? So when you have a spinal cord injury, this signal can't get through. So depending where you have that injury will determine what parts of your body are impacted most. And that is an important distinction to make. So if you have a spinal cord injury in the neck region or cervical injury, like myself, for example, signal can't get from the brain to the arms, to the body, and to the legs. And this results in a condition called quadriplegia. Now, technically, I'm quadriplegic, or the new term is tetraplegic. I could still move my arms, but they're impaired. They're not normal, right? Now, if somebody has an injury lower down, let's say in their back area or lower abdominal area, this affects the body and the legs, and this results in a condition called paraplegia. So you'll often hear the terms, he's quadriplegic or paraplegic or tetraplegic and paraplegic, and this is just tells us what parts of the body are affected. Another important thing to know is that, when we think of spinal cord injury, we think of sensation and motor function, right? The person can't walk. However, spinal cord injury affects more than sensation and motor function. It affects bowel and bladder function. It can also lead to conditions like neuropathic pain, spasticity, and put people at risk for medical complications. And for some people, or I would say most people, it's not the not being able to walk, it's the other things that actually impact their lives the most, like bowel, bladder, and chronic pain. Because there's ways to address the mobility. The final thing I want to point out is most often spinal cord injury is really, and I think you mentioned this, acute and unexpected, right? It just happens. I tell people I spent 27 years of my life learning how to be able-bodied. My brain was learning how to do things. And then in a split second, I became paralyzed. And my brain had to relearn everything. And within a matter of weeks, months, and it's such a dramatic change. And it's not only a dramatic change for me, but it's a dramatic change for my family, for things I did. It impacts my work, it impacts where I lived. And these things all have to be taken care of in a short amount of time. And it can be very overwhelming for the individual to basically relearn all these things.
Wow, that gives a great overview. And for many of us on the call, I think there are folks here who are living with a spinal cord injury, and those who are in their close networks. They've gone through this and know, but there's a lot that if that was not your lived experience, you may not realize as much, particularly the non-mobility related areas that you mentioned. What ends up being kind of the course of recovery? Does this take a long time to settle down? Is there an acute period of recovery that kind of moves up quick?
Right. So I guess so I'll tackle this too. So yeah, I mean it's a slow, gradual process. When I was injured in 1992, and at that time I was in the hospital for 6 months. That's unheard of now. I mean, people are generally and even then, I mean, if I think about during my first month or so, just being able to sit up again without passing out because my blood pressure would drop. I couldn't even do therapy. My brain, we've heard of terms like phantom limb pain, phantom limb. I had phantom body. My brain would think my body was somewhere else, was like flipped over or something, and I would have to look at a mirror to see that my feet were down there because my brain was trying to make sense of signals, abnormal signals coming in or the lack of signals coming in, all these things. And so there's that. There's learning how to be able to sit up, to do just everyday tasks of, dressing, bowel and bladder, things we learn as children, are things you have to relearn while you're in the hospital. These are things you have to be able to do in order to transition home. And while I'm doing this in the hospital, my girlfriend was busy at home trying to make our house accessible. And so, or just dealing with so many other things. So there's this recovery period of inpatient rehabilitation, which I talk about, but then I transitioned home. And I would say during those first few years, I was still learning things, learning how to use my hands in a different way, how to push a wheelchair, relearning how to drive a car, all these different things, just so that I could get back out into the community and get back on with my life.
It sounds like quite a process that really evolves over time, because you highlight
it takes a lot of time.
Yeah. And I'm sure as your body is healing and starting to go through its own changes, and then you might kind of land at a certain spot where that might be where you expect to be, then learning how to adapt. And of course, as we age, we go through different life experiences, so new challenges are going to arise. I'm sure once say we went from only keyboard related computers to tablets to smartphones, all of these, each new piece of technology might represent a different challenge that you would then need to learn to adapt to. So it sounds like a lifelong process that evolves over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And go ahead, Jean. I see that you've.
Yeah. And to add, and you were starting to mention this, Trevor, one of the other things that I've learned about in conversations with people with spinal cord injury are all of the sort of interpersonal things that change after you have that injury. So a sense of vulnerability, especially if you're someone who depends on others to care for pretty basic needs, a loss of control or a feeling of a loss of control over life. Your privacy often kind of goes out the window, especially when you need help with bowel and bladder and bathing and these other kinds of things. I've had people talk about how their circle of friends sort of shrank or changed a lot because people didn't really know how to interact with them after the injury happened. And then there can be financial stresses and other things. So there's a lot of non-medical things that go along with the spinal cord injury experience as well.
That's a great point. I think you're highlighting really that emotional, social, and community-based transition that needs to happen, and that I'm sure is dynamic, changes over time, and not only affects the person with spinal cord injury, but their circles and how they respond. And hearing all of that, it makes me think of some of our residents at Cheshire Home and how they're oftentimes still kind of in the thick of this early response. Many of our residents are within only, we get folks even within months of their injury, but some are considerably longer out. Like we'll be hearing from Hassan, that it's been about 2 years now since his injury, and is still a dynamic process. This is probably a good segue. Why don't we hear a little bit from Hassan and his experience with his injury, and also what with experiencing spinal cord injury research and what that's meant to him.
Hi, Hassan.
Hello, madam.
How are you?
Fine, yes, sir.
Good, thanks. We're going to talk today a little bit about the research projects that you have done in Kessler.
Okay.
What made you go into it? What made you decide?
Ambition to ready to start over again, to get involved with something, not just sitting dormant in the room and living in the accident and trying to, get out of that accident and start life again.
Okay. Was it hard for you? What did it entail for you being part of a research project?
Well, they were trying to improve the design of the glasses that you can move with your eyes. You can move the cursor with your eyes, so you don't have to use, if you don't have the use of your hands. And it was really cool being part of the study. I liked it.
Would you encourage other people to do it?
Of course.
If you had a chance to talk to the researchers, what would you want to know? What would you want to talk to them about?
Developing something more affordable in the exoskeleton realm, something that all quadriplegic, paraplegics can use, because a lot of the things that are out there today are either for paros, or like if you have a little bit more trunk function, that's it.
What would you ask the researchers if you could speak to them? What would you want them to know about having a spinal cord injury?
Everything isn't about walking. It's more about bowel function, trunk control, mobility in your arms, mobility in your hands. Being a quadriplegic, I know that if I had the use of my hands and my trunk, my life would be a lot more different than what it is now.
All right, well, thanks to Hassan for joining us remotely there. And, he does highlight a lot of those same themes that we were talking about. When you think about spinal cord injury, many people think, oh goodness, the person isn't going to be able to walk again. But really, that's just one piece. And the more impairing pieces may be all of the other, like bowel and bladder function we talked about. We talked about pain. It sounds like that's what we're hearing from our folks who are experiencing spinal cord injury and engaging in our research. I don't know if Trevor and Jean, you had any direct comments to what Hassan had to say, or anything you want to jump off of there.
Well, I think one of the exciting things about being at Kessler Foundation is that the research program that we have really touches on a lot of the things that Hassan was mentioning, those things that aren't just about the walking. There's certainly a really wonderful and innovative program focused on the use of exoskeletons and using electrical stimulation to try to promote recovery. Some of that's walking function, some of that's using your arms. As he mentioned, one of those things that he felt his life would be different about if he had more arm function. But we also have colleagues who are working on looking at the characteristics of communities, what the built environment is like, how accessible is it, how much access do you have to places for employment and transportation, and how that affects your quality of life and health after spinal cord injury. We also have colleagues that look at healthcare disparities, that look at race and ethnicity and other factors that can influence your experience of the healthcare system and of living in society as a person with a disability. As Trevor's very interested in, as you mentioned in our introduction, we're both very interested in secondary complications. And the big three for most people with spinal cord injury are kind of bowel, bladder, and skin. Those are big areas, and pain being a huge one that comes up for a lot of people. So we've been involved in work using lots of different kinds of modalities to look at chronic pain and try to improve it in people. And then other work going on is looking at caregiving, and that's some of the work that I'm involved in, trying to help train hired caregivers, help them to understand spinal cord injury better as a means of helping people be able to transition to home with in-home help, and also supporting family caregivers who play such an important role in implementing a lot of the things that we as clinicians want people to do. So we want you to shift your weight, and we want to make sure your clothes don't have any wrinkles so you don't get a skin sore, and that things are properly maintained. But very often the work of actually doing that falls on other people, and we want to support them as well. I'll pause there and see, Trevor, if there's anything you want to add in terms of.
No, I mean, I think we really like to offer a variety of research options for people. And our research is actually driven by, I mean, Jean and I are both clinicians. And so our research is driven by the challenges we see in people with spinal cord injury and their loved ones. So a lot of times our projects start as small projects with ideas that we get from people that we work with, that expand to larger projects. And really our ultimate goal is to restore that individual to the level of function they had prior to their injury. And so everything that we can do to just get that person that much closer, or at least getting back on with their lives, and not having to deal with medical complications, or, as you pointed out, Erica, people are also aging with a spinal cord injury, and that has its own complications. And for somebody who's has a spinal cord injury and has lost so much function, they spend a lot of time trying to get function back. And then as they age and start to lose that function slowly, it can really have a profound psychological effect on them, because they feel like they're taking a big step backwards. So it's trying to work with those individuals and address those changes that happen to all of us over time, and try to minimize their impact on them and their quality of life.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine that with the medical community's ability to maintain overall health and well-being, we've had so many advances. They can keep people healthy. So this way they're probably living longer with a spinal cord injury than they have before in history. So these are now new things that we are coming across. And if we don't start the research on it, then we don't have the good advice to provide our medical professionals, clinical community, to be able to give them best practices for what would be most helpful. So why should people care about and participate in research like this?
Well, I'll speak to that a bit. I am, as you mentioned, the head of our institutional review board, which is the group that watches out for the safety of human subjects. And we really couldn't do what we do without volunteers. You know, we need those individuals from all walks of life who are willing to participate in research to help us learn. And there's lots of different kinds of research that we do. Some of it are surveys that people can do online or over the phone. Some projects are about trying out different technologies or different medicines. Other projects are what we call qualitative research projects that might involve conversations or interviews to learn about people's experiences. And we really can't understand what the needs of people with spinal cord injury are without working with them to find out what those needs are and where they want us to place those priorities. And it's also been really important to not only involve people with disabilities as participants in research, but also as partners in planning that research. There's been more of a push in recent years to involve people with lived experience in the process of identifying what the project should be and how they should move forward. And that's something that we are involved in as well. So really, we depend on volunteers. We take many steps to protect their health and their safety and to try to make research as positive an experience as possible. And we've really learned a lot from the people that we've worked with over the years.
And I'm thinking back to what Hassan was saying about why he got involved in research, and that he felt like it was a way to get involved, to take some initiative. Is this something that you regularly see with your research participants?
Yeah, I think we do. And Trevor, I think you've had some experiences about that you can speak to.
Yeah, no, I think one of the challenges, and certainly speaking from my own experiences, is just getting out. You have this injury and there's this inclination to just stay home. And getting back out there and a research study is one way to do that. It adds some structure to your life. You get back out there, and it's a way to learn more about your injury. And so I will see profound changes happen with individuals, and it's not from the study itself. It's just from them starting to get out. And they start to push themselves a little more. They start wanting to become more independent. They may encounter others with similar injuries while doing this study, and they'll learn from them. They come to Kessler for a research study. They see people driving. They start to realize that these are things that they can do. Because while they're in the hospital, they're just in this really kind of isolated situation. And it's not until they're back out into the community and coming back and seeing other people with spinal cord injury at other stages that they start to see what's possible. And like I said, just learning so much, taking a vested interest in their own injury and learning is just a big step for them. So.
Absolutely. I think there's been so much growth that can happen at the individual level. And Jean, I really like that you highlighted how much researchers rely on our participants to tell us where to guide our next questions. And as you mentioned, a lot of the agencies who fund this research are not only encouraging, but requiring that we make sure that we hear from the community who is affected to make sure that we are doing the research that matters, that is going to be impactful. And so we always want to listen, and then also be able to have those folks in our studies, because that's how we find out the information that we need. And I want to go back to another thing that you were mentioning, Jean, about your study about training caregivers, and whether that's paid or unpaid. And one of the challenges I know that is often faced when our Cheshire home residents, when they're deciding what to do and leaving the hospital, where are they going to head next? Especially for our our group, a lot of them are relatively younger. So the types of places that otherwise would offer the level of care that they need would be more of a geriatric nursing facility, a skilled nursing facility. And that they may not have as direct knowledge and experience in working with someone with a spinal cord injury. But also, to Trevor's point, that's not going to be necessarily the best for the person with SCI, for their psyche, for what they're seeing and how they feel about their lives and transition. Jean, can you tell us a little bit more about that sort of training program? Is that research that's ongoing? Was that recently completed?
Yeah, so that's a project that's just at its tail end now. It was implemented first with funding from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, which is a federal government agency, and then also has some funding from Paralyzed Veterans of America. And it was a project that took several years to do because it really was rooted in qualitative research where we had conversations with people with spinal cord injury, family caregivers, as well as home health care aides that had been nominated by their clients as being very good caregivers and really knowing what people needed to learn. And that process really started with asking them what their experiences were. For the people with spinal cord injury, we would ask, what kinds of things do you find yourself explaining to new caregivers? What kinds of things do people tend to misunderstand? We would ask of the experienced caregivers, what were some things that were surprising to you when you first worked with your first client with spinal cord injury? Or what were some things that you learned in your first months of helping to assist someone? And we use that information to build an online course that talks about many aspects of spinal cord injury. And the first part of the course really are people with spinal cord injury expressing what a tremendously important role those caregivers play in their lives, so that right from the get-go, they feel appreciated, because often, especially for hired caregivers, it's not a very glamorous job. It doesn't tend to compensate a lot, but it's so important and so valued. And so we wanted to open with that message. And then it proceeds to talk about the physical effects, like Trevor was talking about, the kind of psychosocial, the interactions with others and how those things are affected, and then complications, and then common misunderstandings. The idea being that spinal cord injury is not common, even though it looked like several 100,000 people in those stats that you saw at the beginning. Compared to brain injury and stroke and cancer and lots of other things, it's a much smaller population. And so, as you were alluding to, Erica, many healthcare providers, especially assistants, are maybe more used to working with older individuals who may have memory issues or may not be able to make their own choices as much. But this group of people has the ability to communicate, to make choices, and they have that right. And Cheshire Home, I think, is a unique place where someone in that situation can live and really be treated like a person and not a patient, and have choices and be able to have time to make that transition into their new life with spinal cord injury and forge their own path.
Wow, I hearing that line of someone can be treated like a person and not a patient, that hit. I think that's really the goal we're after, and it, I think, is appreciated by that caregiver and dedicated patient dynamic, that they can really then work together best to get the person's needs met and be better in communication. So I appreciate that you're doing that research. I just saw a question in the chat, whether or not that online caregiving course is currently available for the public to access.
It will be soon. It's in its final production stages, and we'll be very happy to partner with Cheshire Home to help make sure that can be shared with anybody who might be interested in it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. And I think that was a question from the Reeve Foundation. So I'm glad that they're seeing that value as well. And so, and to speak about the relationship between Kessler Foundation and Cheshire Home, I know that a number of the Cheshire Home residents have been involved in research. How is that dynamic? I know both Jean and Trevor, you've been working in spinal cord injury longer than I have, so I feel like I'm a little bit new to the game, but I know you've worked with them for quite a bit. How has that been for you, and how do you see that partnership?
I think, as we were alluding to earlier, Cheshire Home really is so unique in the way it provides a supportive environment for people in that transition. And Trevor can speak to sort of his transition period as well. But, those lengths of stays being so short, people need time to be able to figure out how to operate in the world. And, Cheshire Home really provides that vital transition opportunity for people who are trying to figure out what their path is going to be, who are getting used to living in a very changed body, who are interacting with people differently. And it provides that safe place to grow in independence and autonomy and making decisions and kind of rethinking your life and finding a new path forward. You can still live a very healthy, happy, satisfying life with a spinal cord injury, but it just won't look the same as it did before. And I think Cheshire Home, both through the attitude it has towards the people that it's serving, and also the practical supports it provides in terms of transportation and access to medical care, and all the other things that are vocational training, all kinds of things that can help people with that transition. So Trevor, I'm curious, you have went through that transition yourself, and
Right.
Without necessarily this kind of place in it, and I'm wondering what your feelings are.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the services that Cheshire Home provides are just invaluable. I just think of, I mean, nursing homes are fantastic, but they're a much different environment and feel. It's often where people go for kind of an end of life stage, and for somebody who's young with a spinal cord injury, who's trying to get back on with their lives, it can be just such a depressing place to be. And places like Cheshire Home have a much different feel. It's really kind of a transition, and it's helping that it's a bridge to get back into the community, a place where people can either learn how to just have that much more time to learn how to do the various activities of daily living that they'll need to live independently, or to give them time to get those things set up at their own home because lengths of stay are so short. The other thing that's nice is you're surrounded by other people with spinal cord injuries. So you learn from them. You learn from, and each of them are in different stages of their injury. And so you can learn so much. And so it's Cheshire. We're so lucky at Kessler to have a place like Cheshire nearby, and that Cheshire is so supportive of their residents participating in research, so that, because I see research as an opportunity to kind of, I mean, somebody may not be going back to work, but they can participate in something. It's kind of volunteering in something. It's adding some structure to their day, and they can gain a lot from that, as well as learn something about their injury and potentially benefit from the research project themselves. So.
And jumping off of that, Trevor, I'm glad you mentioned potential to go back to work. One of the initiatives that Cheshire Home, I know, is bringing back now is a brand new vocational program where we're looking to get people more specific job skills and figuring out how to have a job and do all the job related tasks in the context of their injury. So we've really just gotten that going. And I know you have a few ongoing projects in vocational rehab. Can you talk a little bit about those projects? Sure. and the importance of voc
Sure.
rehab?
Sure. Well, I mean, if you think about it, our lives, we're going to grow up, get a job, and have a family, right? And for many people, spinal cord injury happens primarily in young adults. And so you could either be working or about to work, and you have this injury, and suddenly that part of your life has changed dramatically. Work often defines who you are. When you meet people, they'll ask, what do you do for a job? And so when somebody has an injury like this that impacts their function so much, they often don't feel like they can work. It's like, how can I work? I had this catastrophic injury. And so at Kessler, we have a project that we've launched, an early intervention. So newly injured people with spinal cord injury, we're approaching them about returning to work. And it's not that they have to return to work right now. It's just to get them thinking about it,
Mm,
that it's possible. Because that's the last thing on their minds, because they're thinking about, I can't bowel, bladder, I've got to make my home accessible. How can I even think about working? But it's good for them to start thinking about it in that context. And for those people who were working, that early time is when their previous employers, sorry, I get those terms confused, are there saying, what can we do to help? Let us hold your job. Or there may be another job that you can do with us, and there's no rush. Just keep us in mind. And they're there. That's when there's the greatest support. And so we're having those conversations early. And for us, the key is we use the term competitive integrative employment. So competitive in the sense that when somebody gets a job, they're getting a competitive wage, right? And it's integrated. So you're not in a sheltered workshop. You're integrated, you're mainstreamed, you're working with other people, able-bodied, whatever. You're just back out there in mainstream. And it just broadens your circle of friends and just basically getting back out in the community. You start to think of yourself just somebody who maybe has a disability. I mean, that's something you're dealing with. And we all have our disabilities in some way, right? I mean, some are obvious, some are hidden. And you're just going through life with that disability, but you're going through life. I mean, you have your job, you're getting with your family. And so it's just, reinforcing that message with people with spinal cord injury that these things are possible. And once you start doing that, your life kind of starts to feel like it's more normal.
mm,
And it's a key step to going back to feeling normal, I would say.
mm. And I know that the research has really borne out that vocational rehab and spinal cord injury is absolutely helpful. What you're doing now is this early intervention to say, okay, let's try to start the conversation early, get things on a different trajectory so it's not as much of a big
Yeah.
lift after, say, 10 years of living.
Yeah.
And this
That's
is
the challenge because, and I just will add, because somebody hasn't worked for 5 years or whatever, just getting back out there is so much harder.
right.
I mean, I just think of myself, I could have fallen through the cracks so many times.
Mm,
And it's just kind of, there's so many opportunities to say, you know what, this is too hard. And I'm just not going to do it. I have a spinal cord injury. I'm disabled. I'm not supposed to work, right? I mean, there's not a lot of incentives, and the concept of disability is that you can't work, and we have to teach people that you can work and be disabled at the same time. I mean, and I think that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and this is a new project that's just up and running. Am I right?
That's correct. Yep. It's an expansion of a program that, through funding from the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation, we launched a pilot program on this early intervention and really had great promising results. And with support from the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation in the state of New Jersey, that is now funding that position in an ongoing contract. It's now doing a larger scale study to actually show that it is an effective program.
And this, I think, highlights sometimes the frustrating part of research of we see these things coming, we're excited about this idea we have, but we now need to wait until the data tell us that it was actually effective. So I think we're going to wait with bated breath to see how this works out in the long run. But I want to start to think about wrapping up our conversation. So I wanted to end with, what do you see on the horizon? What's the newest things coming up for what people with a new injury might expect for their lives moving forward? What is the research telling us?
Sure. Well, I guess I can start here and Jean can add. When I was injured, that was 30 years ago. the hot topic was stem cells. You
Mm.
know, and I mean, there's still research out there in this area, but really the latest hottest research is spinal cord stimulation. You know,
Mhm.
whether it be epidural, which is, you know, stimulating around the spinal cord itself, or transcutaneous, so stimulating the skin above to augment signals. You know, I talked about that disruption of signals from the brain to the body and the body to the brain, using this spinal cord stimulation to somehow kind of create a pathway around that. And so there's a lot of excitement around that.
Mhm.
And you know, what we're seeing is, you know, maybe there are changes in movement and sensation, but people are also reporting improved bowel, bladder, better control of their blood pressure so that they can
Mhm.
stand up without passing out. So, you know, I would say technology has really kind of become the hot topic,
Mhm.
whether it be stimulation or, you know, as Hassan alluded to, robotic exoskeletons. You know, right now they're clunky, they take time to put on and off, they make a lot of
Yeah.
noise. But, you know, with advancing technology, they get lighter. You know, there's a lot of research looking at improving upper limb function. So for somebody with impaired hand function, this is, you know, just could be the world of difference for them. And then it's just ongoing research looking at accessing the community, making communities more accessible, eliminating barriers. You know, the ADA went into effect, I don't know how many years ago, how many decades ago, and we're still dealing with accessibility issues and things like that. So a lot of exciting research on the horizon.
Sounds it.
And I would also just quickly add that, you know, knowledge is power. And as much as we're working on sort of these direct interventions, we're also doing a lot of work to help create educational resources for people with spinal cord injury and their families and their loved ones. The course I mentioned before is part of that, with funding from the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation. Trevor led the production of a series of videos that's on YouTube about medical complications of spinal cord injury. And that's something I think we can share with Kim and help share afterwards. We also have a number of resources available through our partnering organizations, the Reeve Foundation, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and United Spinal, and the Model Systems Knowledge Translation Center, which we work with as part of a network of several centers across the country that have federal funding to produce research and to use that information to help create fact sheets and videos and other sources of good information. So all of those things are coming out as well in parallel with these other innovations.
Well, that's fantastic. It sounds like we are firing on all cylinders, and we have a lot of the best and brightest really trying to figure out how to get people back to independence, that they're functioning the way that they want to be, and just living their life. Yes, with some changes, but living a meaningful, fulfilling life that they choose. So thank you, Trevor and Jean, so much for sharing your research findings, your knowledge, and your experience with us today. And a special thank you to Hassan for sharing his personal experience as well. And so we're going to start. We'll see if there are any questions. Like before, you can either use the raise your hand function in Zoom or type a question into the chat. And one question I think that often comes to my mind is, what might be, I know that Hassan talked about that the differences for the exoskeleton for someone with tetraplegia versus paraplegia. Are there things kind of in that realm that we think might be out to market soon, or are we still in the research realm for a lot of these things?
Oh, and Trevor, we can't hear you quite yet.
Oh,
But
thank
Trevor
you.
has a lot of
Oh,
good
there we
knowledge
go.
about
Thank
this.
you.
Yeah, sorry. So in terms of the exoskeletons, I mean, there are commercially available exoskeletons available for home use.
Mm.
I mean, they're I mean, mobility in terms of the ability to stand, and those kinds of things. In terms of, it's still early on in terms of exoskeleton, like some sort of assistance for the upper limbs. I think it's more for the upper limbs. It's trying to perhaps use those things to assist in training or retraining the brain, or in consort with, perhaps electrical stimulation to somehow, um, help with recovery, or at least improving some function in the hands. So.
All right, thank you. And I see that Clay Graybill has his hand up. Clay, would you like to ask your question?
I actually just want to offer a comment. This has been very helpful, very informative and meaningful. And it's also particularly powerful for me. I happened to be present at the groundbreaking for Cheshire Homes 40 years ago. My father was on the founding board of directors, and I remember throughout the 70s, his late nights talking to other people and going out and trying to raise money. So it's wonderful to see this legacy continuing. And I'm very excited to hear about this kind of collaborative partnership between Cheshire and the folks at Kessler. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Clay. And we definitely appreciate the work of your family and your support in being here today. I see, let's see, we've got a few questions. So one about the current vocational programs at Cheshire. And I could speak to this. So I'm not necessarily, this is not a research project, but an initiative that that has sprung up recently as a bit of a revival. Now I think that we're have more flexibility as COVID is becoming less of a direct concern. We recently hired a director of vocational rehab, and she's been trained in vocational rehab, occupational therapy, and she's been instrumental at forming a program that is a 360-degree look at how to get folks back in that workplace mindset. And as you're talking about, Trevor, there's so many different benefits to being able to get back to work and feel like you're kind of back on track with your life. And especially if you've been out of the workforce for a little bit, and with technology, things go pretty quickly. So what Rachel's been doing is working with a team of residents who are involved in a number of initiatives. So the one that I could at least advertise is the Cheshire Home Soap Company. So you might have seen some advertisements for them. They launched over right before the holidays. And they've been taking this soap making business as an example of something that they can then learn different skill sets. So they're learning, not only how to make the soap, but also marketing, any sort of advertising, and doing research about what's going to be a relevant product, how to build a website, how to launch more broadly, and then also having important discussions on how, as future employees, to get themselves up to snuff in terms of working on their resume, interviewing skills, challenges that they might face on the job. And Trevor, to your point, living in a place with other people who have spinal cord injury, you can at least kind of go off of each other a little bit and say, okay, this is something that you might run into, and you could brainstorm about, okay, what would be a great way to address that challenge. So I think while not the research project that Trevor was mentioning about early intervention, I think this is still kind of following along that research guideline of, let's start talking about employment early, often, and comprehensively. So we are really addressing the fears that someone might have in terms of going back to the workplace. Also, shameless plug, if you go to CheshireHome.com or .org, you can find a link to purchase your own soaps. We do have another question, a note in the chat from Eleanor. She's interested in seeing the educational links, particularly the medical complications. So remind me where I can access this information. So Kim mentioned that she's going to send the links out. And this was the YouTube videos. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Oh,
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a great example between that project as well as the spinal cord injury model systems, the info fact sheets that they put out. It's a great way that research and the community are working together to have a give and take. So, we as researchers, we recognize that we are soliciting a lot of information that that we're asking for in order to help develop our research, but we want to make sure that this gets back into the community so that they can appropriately use it. Thank you, Kim, for sending out that information. And another question, we hear about bowel and bladder function, how they truly hamstring everything that STI survivors deal with. Are there any studies, focus group trials on the horizon for folks to participate in?
So none that there's a couple that are, so I mean, those are huge topics. Let's start with that. So I know some that may be coming up in terms of bladder, looking at perhaps different types of catheters. So for people who catheterize themselves, looking at maybe, is this an improved catheter? And there's a study that may be starting up at Kessler in a month or two. None at Kessler that I'm aware of in terms of straight recovery of bowel and bladder function. I will share the link. I'll send it to the folks at Cheshire Home. There is a website called, part of the curation committee that works on this website, but there is a website called scitrialsfinder.net. And what the goal of that is, any clinical trial that's being done in humans has to register with clinicaltrials.gov, which is a main website with the federal government. And what we are trying to do with scitrialsfinder.net is look at all those trials that are in people with spinal cord injury and represent those on the website in lay terms, because a lot of times these trials are described in terms that people can't understand, and so we're trying to organize them, and then what people can do is search for trials on a particular topic, and by location and by injury level. So are they quadriplegic or paraplegic, and where it is. And so they can, so some people are willing to travel great distances to participate in trials. Others are looking for trials in their immediate area. So this, right now we've focused mostly on those involving recovery. So neuro recovery, whether that be mobility or bowel and bladder. But we're starting to branch to things like pain and so on. So, but I'll send you a link to that. So if people are interested in trials like bowel and bladder, this might be a place that they can look. So
that's great, Trevor. Thank you. And I'll put out a plug also for Research Match, is another website that folks will often use to find research that's targeted to their condition of interest, but it's not specific to spinal cord injury. And so realizing that we're just over the top of the hour, I just want to again thank Trevor and Jean for a very enlightening talk that really gave us a sense of what research is going on in spinal cord injury and how it can impact individuals living with the condition, particularly our residents of Cheshire Home. I'm going to throw it back to Lisa to just wrap us up.
Thank you. Of course, this is an ongoing discussion, so please don't think that because the hour is over that we're done with this conversation. If you have any additional questions or want to learn more, please feel free to reach out to Kim Eskin at Cheshire's Development Office. You can visit our website, and all the information that we talked about today is in the chat, and you'll also receive an email afterwards that has all the information and the links to today's presentation, that great PowerPoint that we started with that had all the fun facts with it. And thanks again to all of that information as courtesy of our friends at Kessler Foundation. We'd like to remind you to please save the date for our paper shred that's coming up on Saturday, April 29th. You can get rid of some of your clutter and give it to us, and you can securely, it'll be taken care of securely. We're going to do that right here in the Cheshire Home parking lot, drive through, touchless contact. And I also just want to again say personal thanks to everyone who participated today. Even our audience, learning and facilitating independence for those who have spinal cord injuries. Thank you for joining the Cheshire Home team, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.